Daniel, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks very much, Tom, and thanks for taking an interest in my work. Much appreciated.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Are you feeling good in the year that we had? You feeling all right?
Yeah, I'm here in Toronto now, and I've been enjoying the Canadian winter with my cohort and co-producer Wayne Lorenz. Certain things haven't changed for us. We're in the studio where we've always been. So LA was fine for a while, and now we're happy to be back in Canada.
I feel like you are well suited to the isolation of a pandemic more than most.
Yeah, I mean, if we hadn't heard about it, we say, um, but we don't try and make fun of all this. That everyone's going through. Wearing the same shoes right now, somehow or other. But in regards to the studio part of us, yes, same as it ever was. We're just hard at work every day.
Well, let's listen to a little bit of the fruits of that labor. This is Under the Heavy Sun.
Work so hard, work so hard. Down the road, baby, let me go. I need a friend, baby, let me in. Mary, 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 I tell you, I know a place.
That is Under the Heavy Sun from Daniel Lanois' new solo album, Heavy Sun. You've really recorded, dozens and dozens of albums over the course of your career, but only a handful of solo records. So when you put something like this out, I take meaning from it. You're here, you have something to say. Tell me a little bit about this record. What are you hoping people take from this record?
Well, it's been said that this record has joy in the center. And we hope that people find the joy in this body of work. It celebrates life. It's got good vibes, and every song has a message in there somewhere. And it's all about harmony singing because I'm in there with my three friends, Rocco DeLuca, Johnny Shepard, and Jim Wilson, and we wanted to form this quartet, the singing quartet. And so the what's nice about singing together is we think about the others and not about the individuals. So I think listeners feel that sense of involvement by us, and I think it rolls into the eardrums of the listeners as well. So
You mentioned that you think the listeners are taking joy from it. How about yourself? What were you feeling when you were making this record?
It was a dream come true for me because I always wanted to be in a singing group. And so I found a lot of satisfaction in getting these guys together in Los Angeles. Johnny Shepard left Shreveport, Louisiana, where he was a choir director and organist, and really the main music man from the Zion Baptist Church in Shreveport, Louisiana. And his term had come to an end. And I said, Johnny, come and join us in LA. Let's start this singing group. He said, I don't know if I can leave my church. I said, Johnny, it's okay. The church is in your heart. It's not a building. It's not a gilded ceiling. So let's be traveling minstrels and spread the gospel. And I sold him on the idea. So he came to Los Angeles and joined us. And he was our hymnologist, let's say. But great group of guys and all good singers. So I think the spirit of Johnny and spirit of everybody made its way into this record.
I'm happy you say I always wanted to be in a singing group, because when I was listening to this record, I mean, I was preparing for this with our producer Chris, and we were kind of going through your entire career and getting ready for this interview, and it made me think about when you listen to Heavy Sun. What do you think the earliest part of you is that's present on Heavy Sun? Like, where do we hear the earliest roots of Daniel Lanois on this record?
Well, I go back to my first recording studio that I had with my brother Bob in my mom's basement. We were aligned with a Christian organization, and they brought singing quartets in from all over the world to tour Canada, and they made a stop in my mom's basement studio, and we made a record in 2 days with these people, different kind of groups all the time, and I couldn't believe it was happening. here I was, a kid from Hamilton, and four beautiful voices pouring out of the speakers. It was really a big part of my education. But I became fascinated with this music, and I thought one day I might be one of those people.
And this is sort of a continuation of that, hey? These are great. This is a quartet record in the same kind of fashion.
Exactly, yeah. So the four parts, there's always a lead melody, and then the role of the other three singers is to complement the central character, that being the melody. And it's quite an education in itself because you can't be jumping all over the place as a support role. So obviously we need to remain loyal to the chord changes and still support the melody. So oftentimes we do what we call block harmony, where we are creating a chord, a triad behind the melody. So it's a fantastic role to play.
I want to talk a little bit about those early days with you and your brother Bob making records, but I first want to get there too. I want to start even earlier than that. You lived in Gatineau in Quebec until your mother took you and your siblings and moved to Hamilton after falling out with your father. I want you to listen to a song from your first solo album, Acadie, released back in '89. Just to let you know, this is a song that gets sung a lot at house parties in Corner Brook, Newfoundland. It's called Jolie Louise. You said that this song was written from the point of view of your father.
That's right, yeah. How sad he was that he lost his family.
Just take a listen to this.
All right.
En septembre 63, kids are gone and so is Louise. Ontario did go near la ville de Toronto. Now my tears, they roll down tous les jours. And I remember the days and the promises that we made. Oh, Louise, my Jolie Louise, my Jolie Louise.
The kids are gone and so is Louise. Ontario, they did go near la ville de Toronto. As you mentioned, mirroring your father's experience, your own family's experiencing. What do you remember most about your parents splitting up?
Well, I remember a fabulous culture in Gatineau and the nearby woods, because my dad was a hunter and his friends were that as well. So we spent a lot of time in the outbacks of that region, and I got to meet all kind of old timers that told me stories of cutting ice and ice fishing, and living in cabins in the middle of nowhere with no electricity. And so I have fond memories of that. And my dad was a carpenter, builder, and everything was going great. And my mom was beautiful, and we had the most wonderful family. But when my dad took on too much work, things fell apart, and he bit off more than he could chew. And then he hit the bottle, and my mom didn't want to put up with it anymore. So that was it. She put the four kids in a car, and we were gone. We were joking about that kind of thing with my friend Ryan Worrell the other day, because there was an alert that came on the telephone. Somebody had put two kids in a BMW SUV, had driven off, and the whole country had to hear about it. Man, my mother would have been put in jail for driving off with her four kids, but she did the right thing.
Well, it happened again, right? I mean, when you ended up in Hamilton, your father would come and take you and your brother back to Quebec with him. I mean, I've heard you say before that would be called kidnapping now. What do you think was going on when you were a kid?
Well, my dad did come back and scooped up the three boys and took us back to Quebec, and we lived there again for a while. The volley happened a few times, but it stopped when my mom came to get us one more time. I mean, those were more renegade days, there was no internet, and people didn't have cell phones. So you got away with that kind of behavior then. And I appreciate something about it because things were more clear cut. And, I was happy to be living with my mom after a while. We didn't want to be, going back and forth, and it would have been impossible anyhow because it's too far away. It's 500 miles away. So.
Listen, only talk about this as much as you want to, because I know it's a bit uncomfortable, but looking through your memoir there, Soul Mining, you wrote, my dad was hitting not only the bottle, but also my mom. And again, I understand that might be painful. What do you think the effect of that domestic violence was on you?
Well, yeah, nobody likes to hear screaming in the night. And all I can say is that whatever emotional damage was caused, I just poured everything that was left of me into music. And I'm glad that music was that emotional phase cancellation. And I was able to pour everything into something that I loved. And I'm not saying it was the answer to all the problems, but it certainly worked for me that I was able to decide that music was not only my savior, was going to be my love from there on. And I stuck with it even to this day.
Emotional phase cancellation is a really beautiful turn of phrase there. I think only some nerds might get it, but also what you're saying there. I mean, it's about reversing a waveform so that the waveform disappears. But it implies not an escape, but an erasure. So music actually helped you erase some of that trauma.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, somebody might say, well, it just caused you to stop thinking about it and not face it directly. And let's say they're right about that, but that's not so bad. I mean, I could have gone to a shrink my entire life, and I don't know if I would have gotten to the same place that music took me to.
Well, let's get to some of that music. You were telling me earlier about the gospel quartets that were coming to your mother's house and to the early studio you had. I'll set this up for folks. So your mom let you and your brother set up a recording studio in her laundry room in her basement. You called it Master Sound Recordings. You charged $60 a day to record there. Tell me who was coming through. Give me a snapshot of who was coming through the laundry room these days.
At first, it was just kids around the block, maybe some bands that I was associated with as a young guitar player. But then the word got out pretty quick that we were doing good recording, and I started recording a lot of folk people. Willie P. Bennett came down, a guy named Joe Hall, Quarrington and Worthy, to name a few, all really great artists. Sylvia Tyson recorded down there. And then, to my surprise, we had people from Buffalo coming in. So our dear artist who wrote Super Freak came in. And
Rick James.
Rick James came in, and boy, that guy was a godsend.
What do you mean?
He came in by himself. In a matter of 20 minutes, he had a whole track pouring out of the speakers. He was a great drummer, bass player, singer, all-arounder. So my education really broadened with the presence of Rick in the room, that's for sure. Anyhow, it was a very fertile time, and it just kept booming from there. We started getting more people coming in from Toronto. I made Raffi's children's record, his first children's record, in the basement. And I was just really exposed to a lot of talent. And I love the medium. I love helping people. I couldn't believe it was happening. And I just stayed at it and barely got any sleep there for a decade. And I just record after record after record. A lot of Jamaican records too, because the word got out that we were in the Jamaican community that of Southern Ontario, largely Toronto people, and we started getting a lot of Jamaican clients. So I got to hear a lot of that great music, as if I had anything to do with Jamaican music. But I was happy to help these people out, and they certainly helped me out with broadening my scope.
You were a kid, Dan. Like you were like, hearing this story, I keep on thinking that you're like, oh yeah, you're in your 30s at this point. You were like a child. You were a teenager.
Yeah, I was a teenager when it all started rolling. Well, I had to quit school. I wasn't about to spend the next 5 years. I didn't even finish high school. I thought, but things are going really good here. What am I going to go to school for? Certainly, I didn't need to go to school to learn that trade, because at that point, we were quite advanced. My brother was a lot more technological than me, so he taught me everything about the science of it. And I was already musical, so I just applied my musical gift to the techno teachings of my brother Bob, and that's it. We just got better and better at it. We figured out what transformers did. And then we started this thing called house sound.
House sound?
I was also a pretty good guitar player at that time, so I did a few recording sessions in Toronto, and I found that there was something curious about the Toronto studios. They kept everything hidden in closets. And what I heard about Motown was the opposite, because Motown had a house drum kit, nailed to the floor, and James Jamerson had his plug in one hole, and you get the automatic bass sound. And I said to my brother, "Well, let's do what they're doing in Motown. Let's make sure that we have house sounds. So when musicians walk in, um, I've already got a nice bass sound, piano sound, organ sound. All the sounds are there, so you don't have to be tinkering around pulling microphones out of the closet." So we started developing a reputation for fast results, and people got to like the sounds that we had, and so that's how it started.
It's interesting to me, Dan, that most kids when they're that age, they're starting garage bands, and they want to be on the road, and they want to tour, and they want to be in bands, and maybe recording and producing is something that might come to them a bit later. It is interesting to me that even at a young age, it was recording, it was producing, it was creating music that was on your mind. I know of course you were in bands as well, but it is interesting.
Yeah, I tried to keep both parts of my life going. I was a pretty good guitar player, and I played for some really great people like Shirley Icard, Ray Matarek, David Bradstreet, Sylvia Tyson. We toured all over Canada, but I would always come back to my studio.
Why?
I don't know. I just felt that it was a creative arena that held a lot of potential for me, and I was able to experiment and try things in a different way. It was an opportunity to do something that was unique to my vision. Just as a continuation of the house sound, and I started developing special processing technique that I was excited about, and people liked what I was doing, and I just kept going with that. And I worked with some very inventive producers that encouraged me to push those kind of buttons. A guy from Toronto named Billy Bryans. He always said, "Come on, Dan, weird it up a bit more."
Weird it up a bit more. That feels like a good credo for your life.
Well, hey man, the experiments never stop. Even we're taking the time out to speak, and thank you again for having me on your show. But Wayne Lorenz and I are, when we're finished here, we're going to get back to this very inventive piano record that I'm working on, and it didn't take long. We're discovering some avenues of experimentation that we never knew existed before. So I can't wait to get to it later this afternoon.
Well, I won't keep you too long. I heard your
drum. Oh, we're fine.
Well, I'm glad. I don't want to get in the way of the genius here. I heard your drums were underneath your mother's bedroom.
The drums were underneath my mother's bedroom. Bless her heart, and my sister too. They were upstairs trying to get some sleep when maybe we worked a little too late. But my mom was very patient. She never criticized me on anything and never told me what to do. She always knew where I was, for one thing. But a great mom. We lost her about 6 months back now, and but she was the force of my life, and she was really the brave heart of the operation, and she always encouraged us to follow our instincts and do whatever we wanted, what we were most excited about.
What was her name?
Gilberte.
And you lost her just a few months ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm sorry for you.
Oh, well, time eventually comes around and knocks on the door,
Why do you think she was so supportive?
I think she recognized that I was passionate about what I was doing, and my brother Bob as well. And she was just so happy that we found something that we loved that much. And I think she really appreciated having all kind of characters coming around, whether it be Rick James or gospel groups or nice people from Toronto. And they oftentimes just sat at the table and she cooked for people. And I think people really, clients really appreciated it. It was a family affair. And, she started young. She was pregnant at 17.
Yeah.
So she kind of grew up with us.
It's rare.
It's rare to not be told what to do. it's I've heard, that parents tend to push their kids along and make suggestions, but I never got pushed too hard. I always asked if I could do music, and she accommodated my dreams.
I'm sure she was very proud of you.
Yeah, she got a taste of the good life. I tell the story of her. She's got the Grammy Awards with me at Radio City Music Hall in New York, and I win the Grammy Award for Best Producer, and she comes backstage and she gets to hang out with Tony Bennett, because Tony got one that year as well. And she hit it off with Tony. And I look over, and Tony Bennett is giving her a foot massage. I said, what's going on here? My mom's pretty good looking, so Tony took a shot to her. It was quite a story she told her sisters when she got back to Hamilton.
What a great life you gave her, obviously in return.
Yeah, hey man, she was never left out, and bless her heart. So we need more moms like her, for sure.
Daniel Lanois is my guest. He has a brand new album out called Heavy Sun. We're talking about the road that led to him making that record. And I'm sure at this point people think we're going to start talking about U2 or Robbie Robertson or Bob Dylan or Emmylou Harris, and we just may. But I want to talk about a song that I think most people listening to this may have never heard before. But I know it changed your life. This is a Toronto duo called the Time Twins. Take a listen.
King shall walk again someday. Wabooba, wabooba. King shall walk again someday. Wabooba, wabooba.
That is a song called Wabooba by Toronto's The Time Twins. So here's why I'm playing it. Daniel Lanois, my guest, engineered that session. It was produced by the fellow you just mentioned, Billy Bryans. The Time Twins demo fell into the hands of Brian Eno, who then decides he wants to record with you in Hamilton. By this time, you're out of your mom's basement. You're working out of the Grant Street studio in Hamilton. You are well known for your lifelong collaboration with Brian Eno. What did you know about him before he walked in to meet you in Hamilton?
I didn't know very much about Brian Eno. The Time Twins knew quite a bit about him. They had been exposed to more music than I had been. Brian rolled the dice on booking some time at our place, and he just turned up, and off we went. And he had a vision about making ambient records, and we became friends. He appreciated that I was really helpful to him. And we had so much fun, and I was able to continue with my experimentations, a lot of them that I'd started with Billy Bryans. That was it, man. He was making these, what I thought were quite obscure recordings, the instrumental works, but the level of experimentation really appealed to me, and we developed a whole printing of sound effects technique that I still use to this day. And we just got deeper into it and made a series of ambient records that were not very commercial at all to my ears. And I was surprised that Brian Eno would be devoted to such a direction. But he was right, man. The records are beautiful to this day. And it was a real lesson for me in not spreading myself too thin, but to go after something very specific.
Tell me more about that. It was a lesson in not spreading yourself too thin, but going after something more specific. Because Eno had gone specifically for ambient music to be played in sort of the background.
Well, I was running a business with my brother. We had a mortgage and a staff and bills to pay, and so I was recording whatever came through the door. I was engineering.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, I thought, well, I should only do what I love the most, and not. I'm not suggesting I recorded things that were bad or anything, but I might not have been emotionally involved with them. I was not passionate about the music, about some of the records. So I decided that I would switch and only do things that I was most interested in at that point.
I heard you made Eno pay up front.
We did. I said to my brother, I don't know this guy from New York, so make sure he walks in with cash. And he did. It's funny.
Did he ever give you a hard time about that afterwards?
No, he walked in with cash, and that was it. We got started. Got off on the right foot.
And he walked in with a suitcase full of bells. I heard that too.
Yeah, he'd bought some bells on 14th Street in New York. He was living around the corner from 14th Street at the time in Soho, and he purchased all these beautiful bells, and he had already recorded the piano for this first Harold Budd record that we worked on, a record that was named Plateau of Mirror. And he wanted the bells to ring through the entire record. He says, I want you to record me for 40 minutes, just bells. And I said, okay. And so I set up a bunch of mics around the studio because he wanted to walk around. And I thought, well, if he walks too far from the mic, how am I going to hear him? So I set up half a dozen mics, and he walked around the studio ringing these bells. And
What's going through your mind here?
I'm thinking, well, at least he's thinking about the end product. He's thinking about the length of the record. That's pretty good.
If nothing else, he knows how long it's going to be.
But the problem was there were a few creaks in the floor that I'd never heard before because nobody walks around on a session usually. So every time I heard a creak, my heart sank a little bit. But in the end, the creaks became part of the sound. And wherever there was a creak, I would add, when Eno was out of the studio, I would transport a bell right over top of the creak. And so that
no one would know.
No one would know. It's kind of like Prince coughing at every edit on his multi-track.
When was the last time you listened to that?
Well, I heard we made 2 records with Harold Budd, Plateau of Mirror, and then The Pearl. And my friend Ryan Worrell put on The Pearl a couple of months back. And as I walked into work here in Toronto at my Buddhist temple, I heard the most beautiful sound. And I thought, my goodness, it's more adventurous than what I remember. And it was deep, adventurous, but most importantly, it had the capacity to transport me as a listener. And I was able to be objective. After all these years, I heard that record, and I felt the spirit rising from the ground, and I knew that it was something special. And it made me think that our time had been well spent there in the early days in Hamilton.
I want to play something you worked on with Brian Eno. This is a Deep Blue Day, which features you on slide guitar.
Okay.
My guest, Daniel Lanois, alongside Brian Eno. And you write, Brian Eno was about to become my teacher, not of music, not of the recording process, but my teacher of dedication and belief.
Did I say that?
Yeah, man, you did.
Well, yeah, getting back to what we said a minute ago, he was very directed and he knew what he was wanting. He had produced a lot of bands and a lot of singing songs, and he found some kind of refuge in this instrumental music. And so how lucky was I to have met this man and to be at his side for the making of all these fantastic textured records.
Was that a lap steel or a pedal steel?
Pedal steel. I still have it. I'll ask Ryan to bring it over here in a minute so you can see it on the camera. It was my first steel guitar that I got as a young teenager, provided to me by a great Canadian steel guitar player named Bob Lucier, also French-Canadian. And I met Bob at at a club in Toronto. He was playing, where was he? He was at the Edison. That's right. The Edison played country music, and I was playing at the Brown Derby. And so, Ryan, if you just tilt it.
Oh, he's bringing it over there now.
You can see see how beautiful it is?
Beautiful pattern there, too.
Yeah. So
I should say for people listening, it's like there's like a couple of beautiful black and white triangles going down of it.
Yeah, it used to be maple colored, but I had it painted gold because it deserves to be golden. Thanks, Ryan.
It's beautiful. Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, the Apollo record had a little bit of a country twang to it to begin with. And I said to Eno, well, listen, I got my steel guitar in the closet. Why don't we fish that out and see if it might find its way onto the record? And he said, okay. And that's thanks for playing that little piece there. That reminded me of what it was like to get back to my old friend, the steel guitar. And I haven't stopped playing it since. So the Apollo record was kind of, because as a younger player, I was in a lot of country bands around Southern Ontario. And I had put it away thinking, well, that's a little bit of an antique thought, a steel guitar, because I had moved on to more psychedelic tendencies. But then when we pulled it out, the application was such that it had found a new dimension. It had gone into the stratosphere.
An antique thought is an interesting way of putting it because it's such an old instrument. I've been listening to a bunch of old Opry recordings to the Grand Ole Opry from like 46, 47 recently, from Hank Snow's personal, collection. It sounds great, right? And it's so much beautiful steel on that. And then I listened to what you're doing there, which is so modern and so experimental. And it reminded me of what people often say about you in terms of your production. That there's something very traditional, something very older, something very timeless about it, mixed together with technology that is new. Is that conscious for you, Daniel? Is that something you're consciously interested in exploring, those two things and how they merge?
Well, certain parts of what we do has always been. I mean, melodies are ancient. That if you're plunking a melody on a piano, single note at a time, well, how old-fashioned do things get? So that in itself, as a form, is as old as the hills, but will also forever be. So we can't forget that we are inspired by melody along the way. I heard a lot of those violin melodies growing up as a kid, and that's how Jolie Louise was written. It's kind of a violin melody. And to this day, even this new piano work that I'm doing with Wayne Lorenz, the melodies are such that they. And let me just go over and tinkle one. Like a. Okay.
Beautiful.
So
beautiful sound.
It's just a melody.
Mm-hmm.
And you could have a beat, could have to with it, or you could just treat it as solo piano, or you could say it's a written melody. Let's write a woodwind arrangement of it. And so the treatment of something tradition can bring it into the future. And we respect tradition, we respect the past, but we try and do things that haven't been done before. However we can do that. And so that's it. It's always a combination of the two worlds.
If you're just tuning in, my guest is Brian Eno. My guest is Brian Eno. If you're just tuning in, my guest is Daniel Lanois. We're talking a little bit about the road to his brand new album, Heavy Sun. And Brian Eno will be here in a second. The reason Eno's on my mind is because you guys started working together on U2 records, The Unforgettable Fire, The Joshua Tree, Octung Baby, just to name a few. So I got to talk to Adam Clayton last year, and I asked him a little bit about working with you. And this is what he had to say.
Danny is such a beautiful person and a truly, truly gifted musician. The way we made records, as a six-piece together, it was really about everyone in the room playing, and he was a huge part of everything that I did. And it was great to have a buddy to work up ideas with and learn from. Danny is a great teacher.
Adam Clayton of U2 talking about my guest Daniel Lanois, who's worked as a producer on some of U2's most beloved albums. I think people can sometimes get the wrong idea of a producer. They think of someone sitting at the board, kind of directing, composing. Yeah. Adam Clayton is talking about you playing guitar and singing in the studio with the band. What do you remember? Give me a snapshot of what you remember about recording with U2 in some of those early days.
Well, Adam said it nicely. Eno and myself became members of the band. We became part of the six-piece band. And it was a big part of where we got to with results. yeah, we're pretty good at working equipment and the engineering part of things is something that I'm skilled at. But I believe that they understood quite early on that my contribution was to be more than that, and that I had a experience with harmony singing. We talked about my early
Yeah.
lessons in the studio with the gospel group, so I was able to take those lessons to the U2 arena, and whenever we sang together, then I could quite quickly come up with parts that complemented the melody. And we did all our own background singing in the U2 studio. Most times, Edge, Eno, and myself. And there's something that happens when you don't bring in outside talent. So we were considered the in-house talent. We did all our own singing, and for example, Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For has that of us shouting at the top of our lungs and at the peak of our range. Everybody's singing super high. Eno's a great singer, and so the spirit of that group really got into those recordings. Because I think whatever was resonating within the walls of the U2 studio was really documented well.
What did
on
you
those songs?
What did you make of those fellas when you first met them?
When I first met them, I recognized that they were very driven and hyper intelligent and musically driven, but more than that, I think the troubles that were happening at that time in Ireland were making their way into their music. So they were driven by another kind of engine. It was a war zone at that time over there, and there were a lot of people lost lives, and there was a lot of anger and a lot of unsettlement. And I believe they took it upon themselves to speak about that. Sometimes quite directly in songs, but other times, just by emotion. And so those early U2 records are emotional, partly for that reason.
Were you ever tempted to go out on the road with them and maybe be in the band?
I never got invited to go on the road with them. So whether I'm tempted or not, it wouldn't make any difference.
Well, it crossed my mind. I said, he's such a big part of the sound,
Yeah, well, no, they never asked. And so, I've been on stage a few times as a guest, and let it be that.
Are you ever in the grocery store, picking up hummus or something like that, and you hear one of those songs in the background and you go, well, there I am?
I have heard my work in surprising settings and felt good about what I heard. I was in a cab driving into Manhattan, let's say the Brooklyn Bridge to be romantic. And I heard Pride in the Name of Love coming through the radio in the taxi cab. And I thought, oh my goodness, we made it to the airwaves all the way from, the outskirts of Dublin and isolated by our commitment and geographically isolated, no phones in those days. And I thought, oh my goodness, all that labor and all that devotion made its way to the radio in the taxi cab going into Manhattan. So I was it was a proud moment.
Let's talk about another big record for your collaborations. This is your work with Peter Gabriel on his album. So take a listen to this.
I wanna be your sledgehammer. Why don't you call my name? Oh, let me be your sledgehammer. This will be my testimony.
That is Sledgehammer by Peter Gabriel. So from the outskirts of Dublin, now we're talking about, I believe it was a cattle barn you made this in?
Yeah, Peter had a place in an old cattle barn. That's right, a cow barn in the West Country of England, and that's where we made that record.
Paint me a picture of what it looked like when you were making that record.
Oh, it was just this little laneway, and at the bottom of the lane, it was a rickety old door, and and you either went into the control room, which was this tiny room with not a very glamorous room, but windows. So if cows came up to look in the window, you got to take a peek at them back.
Hold on, there were still cows there?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. And then the other room was the actual cow barn converted, and Peter had his PA in there. And so we either worked in the control room, or Peter would go into the cow barn and pump the track through the PA and shout over top of it to see where he got to lyrically and so on. And what a great singer. Thanks for playing that little clip there. I'm reminded of how, boy, he can really hit those top notes.
He's sounding great.
Powerhouse singer.
I heard you wore hard hats, like construction hard hats, making that record.
It was part of the humor. There were three of us. Peter, a fellow by the name of David Rhodes, who was the guitar player for Peter, and he lived around the corner. So he'd come over, and we'd agree we had to show up for work, to be working by 10, and you had to wear your hard hat because you didn't want any accidents to happen. So it was just part of the regime, that kind of a fun regime that we built for ourselves. To you turn up for work, and let's hit it like a sledgehammer was the term, you know.
Oh, okay.
And so I think Peter got the sledgehammer idea from that bit of humor.
I heard you locked him in the room to write the lyrics.
Well, that's the folklore of it, but it happens to be true.
Tell me that story now.
Well, at a moment when I thought Peter was too distracted, he went into the cow barn part, and it had a very big sliding door, and I slid the door closed so that he wouldn't come back out. I nailed the door with these big railway spikes. Because, he had a habit of spending a little too much time on the phone. It wasn't a cell phone at that time. It was just one of those wall phones with a curly cord.
You nailed the door shut?
I nailed the door shut, and so that he wouldn't come back out anymore.
Was he banging on the door trying to?
Oh yeah, he wasn't very pleased. I almost got fired. But we laugh about it now, and the story's gotten out enough now. So I hope he still finds humor in it. But it's true. I just wanted him to understand that I wasn't there to dilly-dally or waste anybody's time, including mine or his, and that we were there to make a record. And he had a reputation for working slow, and I was determined to deliver it fast.
You produced 2 Bob Dylan records, Oh Mercy and Time Out of Mind. I wanted to read what Bob Dylan had to say about you in his book Chronicles. He said, "One thing about Lanois is that he didn't want to float on the surface. He didn't even want to swim. He wanted to jump in and go deep. He wanted to marry a mermaid." What do you think Bob Dylan means when he says that you wanted to marry a mermaid?
I can only assume that he's talking about my wanting to go the distance. And I wasn't about to accept the party invitation, and just drink cocktails and eat hors d'oeuvres. I wanted to get to a masterpiece if we could. And I think the level of commitment that Bob has to his craft as one of the great American songwriters, he felt the same kind of passion at my end of things. He knew that I wasn't going to be there for the party. I wanted to make something very special for my new friend. And that was established pretty early on, and I think that's why we worked well together.
What's he like?
He's an incredible musicologist, and one of the hardest working people I've ever teamed up with. Very knowledgeable on so much, but doesn't like to waste time. So, my tendency to experiment was not part of his makeup. And so I had to really make use of the time that we had together.
Your tendency to experiment was not part of his makeup?
No, I still did that in his absence, but our time together was such that we delivered to get the center right, that being his words, his vocal delivery, and our main guitars. That's why on the first record we worked on together, titled Oh Mercy, I didn't want to have other people around. I just wanted us to concentrate on the center. So we cut most things to a Roland 808, which is a beatbox. And I had that coming through a stage wedge right in front of him, and that was the drum. We just followed the heartbeat of the Roland 808 on most things, including a song called "Most of the Time."
Yeah. Beautiful song.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, well, so to this day I hear that and I get shivers from it.
He's particular, I don't have to tell you that.
Well, he's particular about the words, and I was impressed at how he kept at it. He'd walk in one day with the words, and we might cut a track, and he'd walk in the next day and say, "No, I've changed the second verse," and so off we would go and change the second verse. And there was wisdom in cutting to the Roland 808 because it meant that we could drop back in and be still synchronized by time. Our guitars came through these small amplifiers in the vicinity of us, but sound blocked by cushions and pillows and whatnot, little gobos we call them, so that the vocals didn't get into the guitar sound. So I knew that Bob might want to change the lyrics. So I wanted to make sure that the guitars were isolated. We didn't have old vocal leakage on the instruments. So we had then the flexibility of going after new lyric lines if he wanted that. And then, very importantly, we had the advantage of fixed time from the beatbox. So I was then able to overdub drums on some tracks, and my echoes still make sense, and to go deeper into the darkness of Oh Mercy.
I hear he doesn't like to do things twice, which is hard as a producer. A lot of record making is doing it again,
Well, it's a good point. I think Bob likes fresh takes, and who doesn't? He trusts his first instincts, and we were ready, man. We weren't about to say, "Hey, man, we didn't, there was a buzz or there was something wrong. Let's cut it again." No. We do our preparation, and we make sure that we never miss those early takes.
Are you still in awe at all? Like I think about when you're making Willie P records and you're making folk records. I mean, some of those records are I think without Bob Dylan, those records wouldn't happen. When you meet him, are you still at that point able to be a bit in awe?
Well, you get over that stuff after a while. You get in the trenches with people, and you just want to get on with doing the best work possible. And so I just put my blinders on, and I try not be affected by mythology or stardom.
Yeah.
I appreciate that people have gotten to a very special place in their careers, but when we're in the studio together, you got to leave all that aside.
I want to talk about maybe my favorite record that you made with somebody else. This is a track from that album. I'll say what it is afterwards. Take a listen to this.
Okay.
Our paths will just keep crossing, yours and mine. Until then, in my pocket, you must go. And I'll take you with me everywhere I go.
My guest is Daniel Lanois. His new record is called Heavy Sun. That's from Teatro, the album you made with The Red-Headed Stranger, with Willie Nelson, that you recorded in what was once an adult theater in Oxnard, California, which I hear you transformed into a Cuban nightclub in order to make that record with Willie.
Yeah. Well, the advantage to recording in a cinema is you got a lot of space, and there was a cool restaurant, a Mexican restaurant across the street called Cielito Lindo, and they had a bunch of dining furniture, like long benches, and so and some of them were disused. They were just kind of piled up in the back, and we went to them and said, "Do you mind if we use those benches?" So we brought benches over, and my cohorts at the time helped me build some risers, and we created this essentially a live club setting for Willie, because he told me when he got started, they were just a dance band. They were a nightclub band. And so I thought, well, why put such a man in a recording studio. Let's have it be that he has a little bit of fun. So we recreated this image that I had of the clubs that Willie once played in as a kid. Um, that was it. It was had a little bit of a Cuban feeling, different levels of risers. We had two drummers, Victor Indrizio and Tony Mangurian. One of them a lefty and the other one's a righty. So it was like one big kit for two drummers. It was pretty cool. And I wanted to have exotic rhythms for his songs, as you can hear in the song. You know, it's got a little calypso in there, and we just had a lot of fun. Emmylou Harris agreed to sing background vocals.
She had the unenviable task in some ways of trying to sing harmonies to Willie Nelson, who famously kind of goes out of rhythm a fair bit. You know, he'll pause a beat and he'll hold back a beat. I watched a video one time of you guys playing together, and I can see Emmylou staring at Willie, trying to figure out when to come in. You know.
Well, isn't she the best? You know, she is. She's practically telepathic. But she had sung with Willie before, so she knew what to expect. And she watched him like a hawk and followed his every phrase. And, and she, you know, a master harmony singer, a master singer all around, but she really understands harmony. So we were lucky to have her, and everybody had a good time. And we got early takes on that one. Speaking of early takes, you know, 1, 2 takes. I'd work up the band while Willie was in his trailer in the parking lot. And when I felt we were ready to have Willie come in, I'd go out and fetch him, and we'd try and get those early takes.
I'm looking at you right now, and behind you are these beautiful plants, Daniel, like gorgeous space, even from what I can see there now in your studio in Toronto. And you're telling me about Willie and the, you know, setting up the kind of the nightclub atmosphere in the theater. Physical space. Can you talk to me about that? How important is the physical space in making a record?
Well, we like to make a space interesting, and why not? It's going to be a lot of fun because we've all worked in conventional studios and they're fine. But as you can see in this studio, I have lucky enough to have some natural light coming from the back of the speakers there. And so we brought a bunch of plants in, and the plants become part of the absorption of sound. And if I was to do a 180 right now, you would see the other end of the studio under the Monk's skylight. And there I have Norfolk pines. They're the most magnificent trees from Norfolk. And they're tranquil, and they speak to me in a very spiritual way. And we're lucky to have them. So the whole place has this, whatever the monks left behind in this Buddhist temple stayed on the walls. And then we added to that with these fantastic plants.
Well, speaking of monks, I want to talk about Neil Young before we go. The Neil Young album you produced is called Lanois. I want to play you something not from that record, but I want to play you something that I don't think you've heard before. I got to talk to Neil about maybe 2 or 3 years ago at this point. And I was in the middle of making a record myself in St. John's. And so after we had talked about politics and after we had talked about his archival project, he started asking me how my recording was going. And I said, oh, you know, it's going like this and that. And we started talking about techniques of recording. Just want to be clear, we weren't talking about you. We were just talking about recording in general. And he started giving me his general philosophy on recording music. And I thought it'd be fun to play it for you. Take a listen to this.
Cool.
Usually take one's the best one if you're ready. And if you're not ready, then you shouldn't have been there. They already got enough perfect records. You know, everybody's making a perfect record. So, you know, that's the last thing the world needs is something good. They need something great.
That's Neil Young on recording. What do you make of that?
I wouldn't say he's wrong. He's never been wrong too much. When I worked with Neil, we got early takes. You know, we did 1 or 2 takes, and we never labored too much because he wanted to record under the full moon. So before the full moon, and just after. So 3 days a month. I think we did it in 3 stints. And I appreciate what he's saying, but he makes a good point. He was prepared. He had his songs ready. He wasn't stumbling over the words, and he knew what he was doing. But we were also prepared in the studio because I knew that he wanted to work that way. So we had we filmed all of those songs, the recording of those songs, and but we really had our sounds down. So Neil, I wouldn't say he's wrong about much, but he said something a long time ago that always resonated with me. If it sounds dangerous, it must be right.
Is if someone comes into a project with you like Neil or something like that, and they have a very fixed idea of how they like to make music, not just that record, but how they like to make music and how they think making a record should go, and you come in with another idea, is your job then to try and push them out of their comfort zone a little bit?
I don't think so. We usually accommodate all ideas in the studio. You know, if I'm working with a group of folks and somebody, has a suggestion, then we follow the suggestion and we let the results speak for us all and make the decision in the end. You know, it either worked out or it didn't. But, we operate by philosophical exchange, obviously, or we wouldn't be in the studio together to begin with. So I've never really had any misalignments with people or told them that they couldn't chase an idea or anything like that. Even with Neil Young, I think we cut 17 songs, and in the end, I was his friend and curator and recommended a selection of songs that best represented our time together.
Is Lanois?
Well, it came out of humor because we had text exchange. I'd send him some mixes, and I always signed Lanois as rather than Lanois, and he was Pinecone Young. So
I got 2 or 3 questions for you before we go, and you've been generous with your time. Living or dead, who would you most love to make music with that you never got the chance to?
As I hear guitar playing, to this day, I'm still fascinated with Jimi Hendrix, and I love the records he made, where he went adventurous and experimental. I think that stuff really holds up. Energy, rock and roll, interesting jazz drum sounds that sound like rock and roll. I think that would have been something special for me. And so if we could resurrect the man himself, then I'd make that record.
What's your favorite sound?
Well, I like the All Along the Watchtower. It's I asked Dylan about it. He says, well, that's really an unfinished song. He says, I'll finish that song one day. But he said Hendrix made it into a guitar song. And so if you listen to the whether you listen to that or Purple Haze or Foxy Lady, you hear the most amazing guitar sounds. And to this day, I don't know how he did it. He just had it in his fingers.
What's your favorite sound in general? Like, what's your favorite sound?
A sound that I've never heard before is my favorite sound. And I've been talking about listening to hip hop radio on the way home after work. I hear some sounds that surprise me on there. I think, how did they ever do that? My goodness. So obviously through a bunch of sampling and this and that and the other thing. And it really resonates with me that there's other people as crazy as me out there pushing the envelope of sound.
It's meaningful to me that you play the pedal steel, because, what I'm hearing is the beautiful thing about that instrument for me is all the spaces in between the notes. As a guitar player, you're so married to da 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 or da 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 da. But with the pedal steel, you get woo, all the quarter tones, all the notes in between.
Yeah.
I take meaning in that. That's the instrument that you choose because I hear it in your approach to music.
Well, thanks for bringing up the steel one more time. Yes, we play with a bar, so we have the advantage or disadvantage of not having frets, so we can get to that place that the voice gets to, because the voice is not a fretted instrument. So if you think of the steel guitar, especially in solo, in singular notes, then it resembles the human voice. But it also does something else. It can have a perfect third and a perfect 5, because when we push the pedals down, we get to tune those pedals. The piano is not afforded that. The piano has to be equally out of tune in every key. It's called equal temperament. Mm-hmm. But we on the steel guitar, if we push those 2 pedals down, we can get a beautiful chord that is a perfect third, and that's hard to get.
What's your favorite? What song have you made that you're most proud of?
Well, I love all my children, so we have to be careful here. But the hair, as I mentioned earlier, the hair still comes up on the arm when I hear most of the time, or standing in the doorway crying like a fool with Bob Dylan. And in regards to my own personal songs, I'm glad you played Jolie Louise, because as long ago as that was, it still resonates true today.
Before we say goodbye, when you think about the course of your career, from recording bands and your mother's laundry room right up to this brilliant new album, Heavy Sun, what makes you happiest about how your career has turned out?
It makes me happy that I'm working with people that I admire, like Wayne Lorenz, who's sitting 5 feet from me right now, so he's going to get embarrassed. But his level of commitment, I had to go out of town yesterday for a personal reason, and when I came back, he had something set up that I didn't ask him to do. And he's a nonstop source of surprises and source of commitment. So how great is that we are surrounded by people we admire?
If you could go back to that laundry room when you met a teenage Daniel Lanois, what would you tell him? Like, what did you figure out later that you wish you knew then?
I mean, it might have been a strength, who knows, but I was very insecure as a kid, and maybe all kids are to a degree. And not to be driven by preconception or expectation. After making my first record, I went to Mexico with some very talented people, and I should have released the music we made, but I didn't think I was ready, because I felt that I had to be that French-Canadian songwriter and write bilingual songs. But so much beautiful instrumental music came out of that Mexican chapter that if I'd been brave enough to put it out, I think I would have gotten to where I'm at today. I put out what I want now.
I was so much older then. I'm younger than that now.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Tom. That was quick.
nice to talk to you.
Yeah, man. And did you get back east at all? Or?
Yeah, I got back for 2 months.
Oh, good. Yeah, I haven't been to Newfoundland in a while, but we always had a great time there. I can remember playing pool with Justin Trudeau. One of the big Juno celebrations happened out there. So I have fond memories of playing pool with Justin. And
where was this, in St. John's?
Yeah, man. Probably before you were born, Tom.
I'd pay money to see that. I didn't know you guys were buds.
Well, I haven't seen him lately since he's been in office, but I'm sure he remembers that I kicked his ass pretty good in Newfoundland.
Congrats on Heavy Sun.
Thank you, Tom. Again, thank you for taking an interest in this new body of work. I'll say it one last time. It's a great harmony record, and I thank my mates, Rocco DeLuca, Johnny Shepard, and Jim Wilson, for joining me on this. And if you want to feel some warmth from harmony singing, pick up the new Heavy Sun record.
Daniel Lanois, thank you for your time.
My pleasure, Tom. All the best to you, brother.